Next Monday, I will not be here. There'll be some type of, you check the Torah tidbits, what the schedule will be, but I will be coming back from Poland. I'm leaving tomorrow, guiding a group, so I will not be here next Monday. And the Monday afterwards is already, I will be here, which is already in the 3 weeks, but we'll get back to the page that we didn't complete last week. But today is a calendar date of significance. It's not Shiva Sarba Tammuz. That's going to be next week on Tuesday. But today's the 9th of Tammuz, and we will see that on the 9th of Tammuz, there's a direct relationship to the 17th of Tammuz, and that we're going to see through certain halachic sections and a poem that was authored by the famous Ibn Gabirol. People think that Shlomo Ibn Gabirol is a street in Rehavia, Rehov Gabirol, or Tel Aviv. There's a big street there, Ibn Gabirol, which it is, yeah. Last year when I led the group to Spain, so we went to Malaga, which is the southeast part of Spain, and that's where Shlomo Ibn Gabirol functioned a good chunk of his life. And there's a statue, a very big statue there, and it says Shlomo Ibn Gabirol and so on, and he's honored by the city of Malaga in the country of Spain. So Ibn Gabirol, who was classic Sephardi, writes a poem, and his poem infiltrates Ashkenazi ritual for some of the slichot and kinot. And this is lifted out of the Ashkenazi ritual of slichot for next week, Tuesday morning in shul. And it's known as the Pismon. The Pismon, many of us know that the Pismon is when the Chazan does stanza by stanza, and there's a refrain that goes along with it. There's a fighting chance that the Pismonim people understand better than the other sections that are literally garbled up with hardly any understanding. Even here in Eretz Yisrael, where people have a command of the language of the medieval poets was not exactly Ben Yehuda's spoken Hebrew. I mean, obviously, if you know Hebrew, you're going to do a lot better in trying to decipher what the message of the poems are, as opposed to somebody who comes from Chutz La'aretz and does not have a command of Hebrew. But nevertheless, it's a Hebrew that's peppered with Tanakh's statements, quotes, or fragments. So you have to be an expert in Tanakh, and you have to be an expert in Midrash. What the poets did was they so beautifully crafted these poems, integrating and interweaving so many ideas that you have to have the background of the Midrashim and to know the Psukim to really get the full import of what they're saying. And because so many people either are not skilled in the Midrash or in Tanakh, or in language for that matter, so they think you have to be yoitze, you have to just gobble up a kazayit and eat it up, and the faster the better, because people don't understand it at all. So that's what's happened to many people with regard to slichot. Our Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik spent time in shiur explaining the kinot. He did that in Tisha B'Av in his hometown in Boston for so many years. The slichot he would explain in the shiurim, whether it was slichot that was part of the Yom Kippur davening. Yes, there are slichot in the Yom Kippur davening, or the slichot that we say on a fast day, public fast day. And this particular pismon is tailor-made for Shiva Sarba Tammuz, so it's very, very timely. So let's just look at the first line of the poem. She'ei ne'esar asher nimsar. She'ei, we're asking a Kadosh Baruch Hu to turn to us. Turn to us, because one of the big issues of Galut is the sensation that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is not there. He's somehow away, gone, hopefully not forgotten. In Eicha, where it says, Al Eila ani bochia, for this I cry, libi yodamayim, my eyes are shedding tears. What was the big tragedy? Ki rachak mimeni menachem nafshi. You are far away from me. That's the tragedy. The upshot from the fact that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is far away, horrible things happen to us because a Kadosh Baruch Hu is not on his watch and is not there. That's the tragedy. And we ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu to come back to us. that we should be able to come back to him, and he should come back to us. And then things will fall into place. That's the message of Yirmiyahu in Megillat Eicha. Ki rachak mimeni. You're far away from me. My consoler, menachem nafshi, the one who consoles me. And for this I cry, Alel ani bochia. So Ibn Gabirol begins with She'ei ne'esar. Kadosh Baruch Hu should have us turn back to him. Who is the ne'esar? The word asir means captives. When we're in galut, we're in captivity. Now, there have been sweet exiles. Many of us grew up in countries where you never in a million years thought you were in exile. I remember the Rav Zichron Livrocha did not like the English word diaspora or the Hebrew equivalent tfutzot. He said it was too refined of a word. It legitimized being abroad. And he said the word is golus, galut, exile. Because when you say the word galut, you say the word exile, you mean you don't belong here. That's what you're trying to say. You don't belong here. But if you say tfutzot, what you're saying is, well, there's some Jews who live in Eretz Israel, and some live abroad, and it's all perfectly okay. If it's perfectly okay, there won't be a return. The only return comes out of a sensation of galut. And when Am Yisrael forgets that they're in galut, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends reminders. And the reminders are usually very, very uncomfortable, painful, and very, very tragic. And we sometimes learn the hard way, and sometimes forget the messages of 2-3 generations before, and we have to get it again. It's a very, very sad, sad story of our travels in Jewish history. She'ei ne'esar asher nimsar. Who are we given over to? Nimsar, given over to. It's a play on word asir and nimsar. You see the same root. She'ei ne'esar. Kadosh Baruch Hu should turn back to look at us, see what's going on. We are in exile. Ne'esar, we're in captivity. Who took us into captivity? Biyad Bavel v'gam Seir. Now, who's Bavel? Okay, we know Babylon. We know that. That's Nebuchadnezzar. Who is Seir in the Chumash? Edom. And who is Edom? Well, it's interpreted by Chazal as Rome, but who is he in the Chumash? Esav. Esav, who Edom? And Har Seir. So that's biblical. And what the poet is saying, that we were taken into captivity twice. Why twice? Because there was the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and there was the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. L'cha yehemeh ze kameh v'yitchanen ben sa'ir. This is an expression of krechsing. Ay, never, how much? How much do we have to go through this? And we're like petitioning you, like a little child, begging. Yom gavar ha'oyev vatibaka ha'ir. This is the refrain. The day that the enemy vanquished us and split the city. Split the city means crashing through the walls of the city, which means the beginning of the downfall of Yerushalayim. All right, when did that take place? What's the Hebrew calendar date for the days that the walls of Yerushalayim were crashed? 17th of Tammuz. So it's not an accident that Ibn Gabirol is writing a poem to be said on Shivasar B'Tammuz. Now, he says something very daring, that both Bavel, leading to the first Beit HaMikdash destruction, and Rome, leading to the second destruction, both armies, with about a 500-year difference, crashed through the walls of Yerushalayim on the same calendar date. Yom Gavar Ha'oyev Vatibaka Ha'ir. So now we go to the source page. We'll continue with the poem, but now we go to the source page. So what you have on source number 1 from Yirmiyahu, Perek Nun Bet, I'm going to read a pasuk that's not on the source page. That really would be a little bit of an intro to this whole subject. It comes from Zechariah Perek Chet. Zechariah Hanavi is at the beginning of Bayit Sheni, second Beit HaMikdash. And he's asked a shaila. Sometimes in the Chumash we have shailas. The Bnot Tzlaf Chad raised a shaila There was a shaila by the Mekoshesh Tzim b'Yom HaShabbat, a shaila. And, Moshe Rabbeinu had to ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu a shaila and get the answer. So occasionally you have a halachic inquiry in Tanakh. So this was a very, very legitimate question that was asked by people in the beginning of Bayit Sheni. They're putting up the second Beit HaMikdash. And the question is, do we continue fasting Tisha B'Av? Ha'ifkeh et tzom hachamishi. Do I still wail? And it just doesn't mean just wail. It means, do we observe Tisha B'Av? Is it a fast day? And so on. Yes or no? I mean, here we're going to have second Beit HaMikdash up and running.
So which source are you?
What was that?
Which source number?
It's not on your page. It's before the source. I happen to have made for myself a second page because of a shir that I gave 20 years ago, and I see I included it. So, beseda. It's a pasuk. It's Perek Chet of Zechariah pasuk Yutet. The answer is dynamite. Ko amar Hashem Tzvaot. God says the following: Tzom haravi'i, v'tzom hachamishi, v'tzom hashvi'i, v'tzom ha'asiri. 4 fast days. The fast of the month of Tammuz, the 4th month. The fast of the month of Av, the 5th month. The fast of the 7th month, Tzom Gedalia. The fast of the 10th month, Asar B'Tevet. Yiyeh lebeit Yehuda lisoson ulesimcha ulemoadim tovim. Will be Yomim Tovim, great days. All right, so the answer is no fasting. Well, that's not how all the commentators took to this. We know a beautiful answer, but we're not sure the implementation of this. When will these 4 fast days, which were incorporated into the calendar after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, because this is Zechariah talking at the beginning of the second, and he knows about the 4 fast days, so it's obviously the first Beit HaMikdash, and he says they're going to be Yamim Tovim. So the Rambam says the implementation is the 3rd Beit HaMikdash, in the Acharit HaYamim, in the days, Mashiach Zeiten, Mashiach come. That's when these fast days are going to become Yamim Tovim. But in the meantime, there's still fast days on the books, and you have to fast them. And what about the 4 fast days in the days of Bayit Sheni? So the Rambam says that Tisha B'Av we fasted. Can you imagine how ironic this is? The Beit HaMikdash is up and running, and on the 8th of Av, the 9th of Av, the 10th of Av, and on the 9th of Av we're fasting, public fast day. For what? For the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. With regard to the other fasts, the Rambam says it was optional. That's a halachic discussion in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Rishut. They're still on the books, but it's not obligatory. But Tisha B'Av was obligatory throughout the 420 years of Bayit Sheni. Amazing. Why? Because the Rambam says that after, even with the building of the second Beit HaMikdash, there was leftover churban, which means the second Beit HaMikdash didn't add up to what the first was. And there was a gap between what once was and what is, and that gap deserved mourning. We had to still mourn for it. So you have this concept. But what does, when Zechariah said, Tzom HaRavi'i, let's just focus on the month of Tammuz, it's the month of Tammuz, which calendar date did he have in mind? We don't know, because he doesn't give us the date. He just says the month. And just like we don't know the month, which date in Av, and which date in Tammuz, in Tishrei rather, and which date in Tevet, and all of the above have disputes, machloket, all of them. Zechariah didn't give us a specific date. But now if we go to source number 1, what does it say in Yirmiyahu, Nun Bet, which is the last chapter of Yirmiyahu? B'chodesh haravi'i, which month is this? Chodesh Revi'i? Tammuz. But Tish'ah l'chodesh, the 9th of Tammuz, that's today. Vayechazak hara'av ba'ir, the famine was very strong. Why was there famine? Because the Babylonians lay siege around Yerushalayim 2.5 years earlier, on which calendar date? And this is in the Tanakh, the 10th of Tevet. In the middle of the winter, 2.5 years earlier, they lay siege around Yerushalayim. No food, nothing's coming in, people are starving, and after 2.5 years, all the supplies are gone. and there's internal strife, and that was the plan. Why should we have to conquer a city? 90% of the people are going to be dead before we crash through the walls. Because of starvation, weakness, they'll be able to be taken over in a cinch. Vayachazak harav ba'ir, the famine was very strong. V'lo haya lechem la'am le'aretz, there was no bread to eat. Vatibaka ha'ir, and the wall was crashed through. Here you have a pasuk that tells us that the crashing of the walls of Yerushalayim took place on the 9th of Tammuz. Now we go to the next source. In Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara brings a Braita, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shimon. Arba'at dvarim haya Rabbi Akiva doresh. There are 4 matters which Rabbi Akiva explains. Va'ani, I, Rabbi Shimon, ein doresh kamoto. I take issue. We're not going to deal with all 4. We're just going to deal with the one that's relevant. Tzom ha'revi'i. When Zechariah said that these 4 fast days are going to be Yamim Tovim, which calendar date did he have in mind of Tzom HaRevi'i, the fast of the 4th month, Tammuz? Ze Tish'a b'Tammuz shebo hufka'a ha'ir. He meant the 9th of Tammuz, the day the wall was crashed. Shene'emar, as it says, and this is the quote from Yirmiyahu that we just read in the previous source. B'chodesh ha'revi'i b'tish'a l'chodesh v'yachazak harav be'ir v'lo haya lechem la'am ha'aretz v'tibaka ha'ir. Why is it called the 4th month, Tzom Revi'i? Because it's the 4th month of the system of counting from Nisan. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Tammuz, the 4th month. So you have an opinion that when Zechariah said Tzom Revi'i, what did he mean? He meant the 9th of Tammuz. And now we're looking at source 4, the next 4, source 3, the next source. The Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit tells us 5 tragedies happened on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 tragedies happened on Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av we'll leave for Tisha B'Av. We're not going to deal with now. Chamisha dvarim eru et avotenu b'tisha asar b'shiva asar b'Tammuz, on the 17th of Tammuz. On the 17th of Tammuz. And 5 things happened on Tisha B'Av. Chamisha b'tisha b'av. Okay? B'shiva asar b'Tammuz, what happened on the 17th of Tammuz? 1. Nishtabru haluchot. Moshe Rabbeinu smashes the luchot. That's back in Parshat Ki Tisa. 2. Butal hatamid. The daily sacrifice already became suspended, which means literally Beit HaMikdash activity stopped. Now you may say, well, it just talks about the Korban Tamid. Don't think for a second that the Kohanim and Leviim were thrown off the Har HaBayit, but they couldn't bring the morning and afternoon sacrifice. But the Rosh Chodesh Musaf for Rosh Chodesh Av they brought, or for Shabbat they brought the Musaf, or some woman brought a Korban Yoledet, forget about it. It means that Beit HaMikdash ceased to function. And I can prove this from the previous Slichas. Pay attention, next Tuesday morning when you say Slichas, there's a piyut that every stanza ends with Ki b'shivasar b'Tammuz, such and such happened. And one says, Batlu olav v'zavach. One says with regard to avonot, because there was no korban chatat, and one says there was no shlamim, which means all of the korbanot ceased to exist. That's what it means. So, but butal tamid, Beit HaMikdash activity ceased. That happened on the 17th of Tammuz. V'hufka ayir. 3rd, the city was crashed through. 4th, saraf afustamus et TORAH. A Roman burnt the Torah. The Gemara is going to tell us we do not have accurate information about this, so we'll just leave it as a tradition. And the 5th is also without accurate historic information. Ha'amid tselem behichal. They put up a tselem or a cross or something. Maybe in the end of Bayit Sheni they put up a cross, but it could mean a statue, some deity, some pagan statue was put up in the Beit HaMikdash. We don't know when, we don't know who did it. The Gemara says Gemara, which means Masorah. It's tradition. It's tradition. That's all. So we have 5 things that happen on Shavasar Tammuz. But what's going to interest us now is number 2 and 3. Butal hatamid. that the Beit HaMikdash activity ceased and the wall was crashed through. Okay? Which Beit HaMikdash? The first or the second? The Mishnah doesn't tell us. It just says that 5 things happened on Shivasa Tammuz. Look at the next source. From the Gemara. Hufka ir b'shivasa havi? You mean to tell me that the wall was crashed through on the 17th? Commenting on the Mishnah that said these things happened on the 17th. V'haktiv, but it says in Yirmiyahu, b'chodesh haravi'i b'tish'a lechodesh, it was the 9th of the month, the 4th month of Tammuz, and vatibaka ha'ir, that the wall was crashed through. So how can the Mishnah tell me that it was on the 17th? Amar Rava, the great Amorah Rava says, Loi kasha, not a problem. Kan barishona, kan b'shniya. We have 2 churbanot, we have 2 destructions. So when Yirmiyahu reports that the Babylonians crashed through the walls of Yerushalayim prior to the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, that was on the 9th of Tammuz. When the Mishnah tells us that there was a crashing through the walls of Yerushalayim, that was the Romans leading to the second. It's a very simple resolution. Very simple. And the Gemara even supplies a braita, the Tanya, Barishona hufka'a ir b'tish'a b'tamuz, b'shniya b'shivasar b'tamuz. The walls were crashed on different calendar dates. That's all. That's all. Now the only question is, why did the Chachamim institute the fast of Shivasar b'tamuz? Or better yet, was there a fast of the 9th of Tammuz? When Zechariah at the beginning of Beit Sheni says, Tzom Revi'i, which calendar date did he have in mind? Did he have the 9th or the 17th? What would be the relevance of the 17th? I don't know. But the 9th is the date that the Babylonians crashed through. So let's follow through on the next source. The Tosfot, the Balei Tosfot on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, commenting on source number 2 actually. Ze tish'a be'tamuz shebo hufka'ir. In source number 2, the Gemara in the underlined brought a source defining the Tzom Revi of Zechariah. This is the 9th of Tammuz, the day the wall was crashed through. Tosfot in source number 5 says, Hainu barishona. Yeah, leading to the destruction of the first time around. Aval b'shniya, but the second time around, the Romans, hufka'a be'yud zayin. The walls were crashed through on the 17th. Umishum hachi, and therefore, avdinan b'yud zayin ta'anit. We make the fast day on the 17th of Tammuz. Why? We're left hanging there. Why? We'll see that later Poskim explain that we suffer today directly from the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash and only indirectly from the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. The feeling being that Zechariah was talking about the fast of the 9th of Tammuz. But then they built Beit HaMikdash. And then the Romans came 500 years later and crashed through the walls on the 17th. So they made another fast on the 17th. But because there's a fast on the 17th Tammuz and there's a fast of Tisha B'Av, their feeling was, let's not overburden Am Yisrael with another fast day. So they let go on the 9th of Tammuz. So today is the 9th of Tammuz. Nobody even knows that it's a fast day. But once upon a time, 2,500 years ago, it was a fast day for the fact that the Babylonians crashed through the walls of Yerushalayim. That's how Tosfot really leaves it. But then Tosfot brings a braita, a source, from the Talmud Yerushalmi that has a different take on what the Babylonians did and when they did it. It says, Matnitan b'Yerushalmi. We have a braita in the Talmud Yerushalmi, and there it says that the Babylonians crashed through the walls of Yerushalayim on the 17th of Tammuz, just like the Romans did 500 years later. But the obvious question is, how can you say that? Yirmiyahu, the prophet, reports that on the 4th month, on the 9th day of the 4th month, Vatibakayir, how can you say this? So the Yerushalmi says, Yirmiyahu deliberately wrote the wrong date. Wow. Let's see the next source, on source number 6, the Yerushalmi inside. Tosfot quotes it, but let's see it inside. V'hufka'ir Ketiv b'tisha l'chodesh ufka'ir. So how can you say va'at amar tekin? You say that it's on the 17th. How can you say that? Omer Rav Tanchum bar Chanilai. Kilkul cheshbonot yesh kan. There was a mess up in the calendar, a deliberate mess up in the calendar. Let's just go back to the last 2 lines of the previous source, how Tosfot takes this Yerushalmi. He says, Kilkul cheshbonot hayu sham. There was a mess up in the calculation. Upalig a shas didan. And the Yerushalmi argues with the Talmud Bavli. Verotze lomar, the mitoch tirdatam, because they were all, in Yiddish we say, famished. They were all mixed up. Because of the Churban, nobody was focused. I think that's a good translation. Nobody was focused. Ta'u b'cheshbonam. They messed up in the calculation, v'ro ratzah pasuk l'shanot mikmo shayu sfurim, which means Yirmiyahu had the right calculation. He knew it was the 17th, but people wrote down it's the 9th. They messed up, and Yirmiyahu wanted to show Am Yisrael for generations to come how bad the situation was, that he incorporated the wrong date that people thought the crashing of the walls took place. And therefore, the bottom line is that both the first and the second Beit HaMikdash, both the Babylonians and the Romans, crashed through on the 17th of Tammuz. And this is the Yerushalmi take on it, as opposed to the Talmud Bavli, that simply says that the first Beit HaMikdash, leading towards the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, Babylonians crashed through on the 9th of Tammuz, as it says in Yirmiyahu. Why don't we fast it today? Because the Romans crashed through 500 years later on the 17th Tammuz. And Chachamim didn't want to overburden us with an extra fast, so they let the 9th of Tammuz go by the wayside, and all we have is the 17th. And then, of course, we have Tisha B'Av afterwards. But the Yerushalmi doesn't believe that. Yerushalmi believes that there's no significance at all to the 9th of Tammuz, except for the fact that they messed up in the date. What? It's a suggestion. It's a suggestion that there can't be a contradiction between that which is written in Yirmiyahu and the tradition somebody's phone is ringing. That there's a tradition, that the tradition of the 17th of Tammuz, and therefore, according to the Yerushalmi, when the Mishnah in source number 3 said that 5 things happened on Shavas Tammuz, and one of them, item number 3, was Hufga'ir, the walls were crashed through. It meant both. It meant both Beit HaMikdash, the first and the second. Now, how come Yirmiyahu says the 9th? The calendar date was messed up, and Yirmiyahu decided for posterity to write the wrong date. Kilkul cheshbonot, to show us how bad things were. Just to give you a little bit of a tasting. So I said I'm going to next week. Those who came a little late, I won't be here next week. I'm going to Poland tomorrow. So next Sunday, we'll be in Auschwitz for a visit with a group, and I will tell them over a little anecdote that I heard myself from a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz. Her name was Sarah Tessler, Zechorna Levracha, passed away just 2 years ago at an age almost 100. She may have been 100 already, from Kibbutz Yavne. She was 17. What happened was, in the groups that I went with, my yeshiva Chashmonaim, we never took along a survivor, because survivors, they don't know everything that went on. They know what went on where they were. But there was a tactical reason that we didn't do it. But on Motzei Shabbat in Krakow, we would borrow a survivor from another group. And we had a big schut of hearing Sarah Tesla on Motzei Shabbat to my 12th graders. And she said she was 17 years old, very thin, short lady. She was, you see, you don't have to be, huge to be a giborah, to be a real hero in Am Yisrael. So she was 17 years old in Auschwitz. And she explained that there was the men's camp, the ladies' camp, and they didn't see each other, obviously. There's no communication. But when they passed to going to their daily work detail, occasionally, they passed a fence where they saw the others. The men saw the women, saw the others, and they were able to scream out a name, Moshe Schwartz. And somebody would say, he's no longer with us. And then they knew he was dead. And they would somehow get information just by doing that. One day, a man screams out to the lady's side, Morgen is Yom Kippur, tomorrow's Yom Kippur. Now, they didn't have a clue of the calendar. Baboker Yomar meet and Erev meet and Boker, exactly what the TORAH said happened. They lost complete sensitivity to time, calendar date. Man, they didn't know that 9 days before was Rosh Hashanah. Man yells out, tomorrow's Yom Kippur. Sarah Tesla says to herself, I'm 17 years old. I still have a little bit of koyach. How many people in Auschwitz are going to fast tomorrow in Yom Kippur? Nobody. They're going to have to work. So I'll fast. So she goes out on a work detail, fasting, and when they come back, somebody yells out that, we made a mistake. Today wasn't Yom Kippur. Tomorrow's Yom Kippur. And she says, I still have a little left. I'll continue fasting. She fasts for 48 hours in Auschwitz. And when they're coming back the next day, some man yells out, we made another mistake. Today for sure wasn't Yom Kippur. Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it's tomorrow. I want you to understand what Kilkul Cheshbonot means, what the Yerushalmi was saying. And she looked up to Kadosh Baruch Hu and said, I don't know when Yom Kippur is or was, but Kadosh Baruch Hu should take my 2 days of fasting and consider it Yom Kippur. I had 12th graders. I could have mopped the floor with a sponger. With a sponge. You know what 12th graders are? Macho, right? 12th graders. They were mamish. They broke down. This Sarah Tesla taught us a little bit, something about what Ma'aseh Gevura was. No different than Rabbi Usha Weiss Shlita here in Yerushalayim, in Ramot Gimel, gets a shaila, and I think it's from Golden Hirsch, wounded, lost both arms, lost part of his leg, and asks him a shaila if on the prothesis that they're going to put on, if he has to make a shechiyanu for a kli chodosh, and how to take a lulav, and how to put on tefillin. This is Ma'aseh Gevura. This is Mamish Ma'aseh Gevura. Kilkul Cheshbonot. That's what went on in the Shoah. They lost total track of time. And Yirmiyahu wanted us to understand that what was going on at the moments of the Churban. We lost track of time. So here you have these two views. Now go back to the poem. Now we're going to understand Ibn Gabi wrote. She'ei ne'esar asher nirmsar biyad Bavel v'gam se'ir. L'cha yemeh gazeh kameh v'yitchanen keben se'ir. He mentions Bavel, and he mentions Seir, which is Esav, which is Rome. Yom gavar ha'oyev vatibaka ha'ir. The same day, date that the Babylonians did it, the Romans did it. Yom gavar ha'oyev vatibaka ha'ir. Ibn Gabirol has the Yerushalmi in mind. Why does he pick the Yerushalmi? If not for the fact that on a Yom Tzom, he wants to have Yerushalayim in his mind. He opts for the view of the Yerushalmi. He's not taking a historic stand here. He's taking a poetic stand of borrowing the view of the Yerushalmi that both Bavel and Esav crashed through the walls on the same calendar date. Now, what the poem does, he goes through poetically the various things that happen. Let's just read this quickly. In the second stanza, Lezot ikaf vespo kaf. Like, you go like this. Where did he get that from? From Balak, from Bilam. You'll see this coming Shabbat, you'll see that Bilam does it. And, this is like Shavasa B'Tammuz time, Parshas Balak. So he has it in mind. He has this phrase very much in mind. L'cha zot ikaf ve'espo kaf b'yom chamesh pizaruni. 5 things happened. Al regel ha'egel haluchot yitza'ani, because of the golden calf. On the foot of the golden calf, the luchot were shattered. V'gam hishmid hatamid, very poetic. The korban tamid was destroyed. Ume'atzato kla'ani v'lachad tsar ir miftzar ubasoger heviani. This is the siege of the city and the crashing through. V'husam elil, a statue, behechal kalil Vidatcha, and your law, which means your Torah, tsar ba'esh, hiv'ir, was burnt in a fire. Notice what he took was the 5 things mentioned in the Mishnah, and he poetically restructured and rewrote it. Yom gavar ha'oyev vatipcha'ir. And then he goes on to talk about Edom and Bavel, but we're going to get to the clincher towards the end. But before we get to that, let's look at the source page again. On source number 9, it's on the second page. Here's Rambam's commentary, Pirush HaMishnah, to Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and he's defining the Tzoma Revi'i of Zechariah, the last line, the underline. V'Tzoma Revi'i hu Shivasar b'Tamuz lefi Tamuz hu Chodesh Revi'i. Which means the Rambam seems to be taking a stand also, according to the Yerushalmi. That's what it seems. But now let's look at the next source, set 10, which is the Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Ta'aniyot. And he gives us all the various fast days. Elohein, here the 4th fast days. Yom Shlishi b'Tishrei, 3rd of Tishrei, Gedalia ben Achikam was killed. Fine, I'm skipping the next line. Asiri b'Tevet, 10th of Tevet, Shabo Samach Melech Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, Rashal Yerushalayim. Nebuchadnezzar lay siege around Yerushalayim, and it led to the Matzor and the Matzog, the famine and so on. V'Shivasar b'Tamuz, Chamishad Varim Erubo. Now you can see he's going to take off on the Mishnah. 5 things happened on the 17th of Tammuz. 1, Nishtabru aluchot, that the luchot were broken, shattered by Moshe Rabbeinu. 2, Butal hatamid mibayet rishon. You see, the Rambam adds 2 words here. This isn't in the Mishnah. That caused all the problems in the Mishnah that we didn't know. But here the Rambam fills in the blanks. V'in butal hatamid mibayet rishon. V'hufka Yerushalayim b'churban sheni. Which means the crashing of the walls by the Romans was on the 17th. When was the crashing of the walls leading to the first Beit HaMikdash by the Babylonians? Not on the 17th, but obviously on the 9th. And that's what, if you look at the next source, 13, the 12 rather, Lechem Mishnah, it's 2, right? 2 sources down. The Lechem Mishnah says, Hufka'a Yerushalayim b'churban bayit sheni. Avogav, even though the Ta'anit Dikra, the fast day of the Pasuk in Zechariah says Tzoma Revi'i, Lo Havi Ela Betet. That happened on the 9th, says this commentator on the Rambam. Mishum Dehufka Ayir Betet. It was, the walls were crashed on the 9th. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Hashta, today, now, of Din and Lei, we fast on the 17th. Mipnei Shechurban Bayit Sheni Chamir. The destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash was much more difficult for us. We suffered directly from the Churban of the second time. Vufkair be Yudzayin. Then, leading to the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, the wall was crashed indeed on the 17th. There's only one problem. In the source right before this, source 11, this is the Rambam when he talks about the Pasuk in Zechariah. He quotes the Pasuk in Zechariah. Arba'a yemei atzamot elu hahen mufurashin beKabbalah. Kabbalah means the Nevi'im. Tzom Revi, Tzom Chamishi, Tzom Hashvi, Tzom Asiri. And he defines them. Tzom Revi, which is the Tzom Revi that Zechariah was talking about? Says Shivasar b'Tamuz, Shu Chodesh Revi. 1 second. If this was the 17th, so how come the Rambam then tells us that the wall was crashed through only in the second Beit HaMikdash? He makes a point to tell us but Korban Tamid was butal, was annulled on the 17th for the first Beit HaMikdash, and the walls were crashed through on the second Beit HaMikdash. But the Rambam believes that the Tzom Revi'i of the first Beit HaMikdash was also the 17th. So is he with the Yerushalmi or not the Yerushalmi? Will the real Rambam please stand up? I make a living on these problems in the Rambam, you know. I have a professor, Rav Meir Simcha Feldblum, used to say, if the Rambam would have been so clean and clear, nobody would have looked at it. You only look at books that have obstacle courses, and it challenges you. And you have to start thinking. But what happened here was something very, very interesting. The Rambam believed that the crashing of the wall of Yerushalayim in the Bayit Rishon took place on the 9th, exactly the way it says it, the Pshat of Zechariah. But they never made a fast day for that event. The fast day was made for something else, for the abolition of sacrificial activity in the Beit HaMikdash. Butal HaTamid. That's why they made a fast day. They made a fast day at the end of Churban Bayit Rishon for 4 events. The laying of the siege in Tevet 2.5 years before, on the 10th of Tevet. On the 17th of Tammuz, when Beit HaMikdash activity ceased. On Tisha B'Av, the destruction. And on Tzom Gedalia, when we couldn't run a local government, a Babylonian-sponsored local government with a governor. And when he was assassinated, that's when the Galut started. The Galut, the exile, did not happen after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Babylonia is willing to give us a chance and run Eretz Yisrael by proxy. And it didn't work. Too much politics. Too much hatred. And it just didn't work. And then came the Galut. So Tzom Gedalia is for the Galut, for the exile. Shavasa B'Tamuz was for the abolition of Beit HaMikdash activity. In the second Beit HaMikdash destruction, they restored the fast of the 17th of Tammuz for a different reason, for the crashing of the walls during Bayit Sheni, leading to the destruction. And the question is, the walls were crashed both times. So why, according to the Rambam, was there a fast day for one thing in the first Beit HaMikdash time, in Tammuz, and in the Beit HaMikdash the second time around it was something else? Once it was for the Beit HaMikdash activity that was abolished, and once because of the crashing of the walls. If the crashing of the walls was such a severe tragedy, why didn't they do it the first time around? And the Rambam believes that when Zechariah said Tzom HaRavi'i, he wasn't commenting on when the Babylonians crashed through the wall. He wasn't contradicting a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that says the 9th. He's saying that the fast was on the 17th for something else. And the something else was the abolition of Beit HaMikdash activity. Why? So here we have to understand the role of Yerushalayim as opposed to the first, in the first context of Beit HaMikdash and in the second context of Beit HaMikdash. Same city, same Beit HaMikdash, I mean, lower scale the Beit HaMikdash second time around, fine, but still Beit HaMikdash. When does Yerushalayim enter into the picture the first time around? Certainly not in the days of Yeshua. Yeshua conquers Eretz Yisrael. In the days of David HaMelech, categorically. It's an area that the Yevusim still have control, and David HaMelech liberates that area. It's basically the last act of conquest in Eretz Yisrael. The conquest begins with going over the Ardein in days of Yeshua, and takes a long time. It took 440 years from time that Yeshua crosses the Ardein for Shlomo HaMelech to build the Beit HaMikdash. For Shlomo HaMelech. Because it says in the Navi, Melachim Aleph Perek Vav, it says, 80 shana v'arba me'ot shana l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael mi'Mitzrayim. It was 480 years from Yetziat Mitzrayim. Not go 40 years from the desert, 440 years. So what was the role of Yerushalayim from that time, from Yeshua until David HaMelech? Nothing. Nothing. It wasn't part of the enterprise of Eretz Yisrael. What was the role of Yerushalayim? So those who are familiar with early American history said there were the 13 original colonies, and then they made it into the United States of America, right? That's why the first flag was 13 stars. Now it has 51 stars, right? Medinat Yisrael, they say. Right. 13 stars. The original Eretz Yisrael was 12 separate entities, political entities. Each shevet was doing its thing. And there were shoftim here and there and there, regional leaders. And sometimes, if there was a war, they would call on shvatim here, shvatim there. Look at the Shirah of Dvorah in Shoftim Perek Hey. She castigates some of the Shoftim that didn't come through when we called them, and lauds those Shvatim that did come through and sent the army. So sometimes they had to have allies, from the internal OUisrael allies, from the Shvatim. The purpose of Yerushalayim was to unify OUisrael into one people. And that's why the city of Yerushalayim was never divided amongst the tribes. Lo nitchalka l'shvatim. That's a halachic statement, by the way. It was never given. It is a corporate ownership of Klal Yisrael. And that happens after Beit Rishon is built. So all of what becomes Yerushalayim focuses, basically emanates from the Shvatim, Eretz Yisrael, and becomes Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is the last item on the agenda. In Beit Sheni, it's just the opposite. Beit Sheni, we receive a license from Persia to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Hatzarat Koresh. Unfortunately, only 5% were Zionists and came. 95% opted for America. It had a different name. It was called Bavel. But it was the same thing. As Rabbi Yehuda Levi writes in the Kuzari, they had their homes, they had their businesses. Their grandparents were refugees, and we're settled. I got into Harvard already, in Bavel, So why make the big move? That's what happened. 95% opted out. And 5%. Chazal say, had Am Yisrael come in mass by Sheni, there never would have been a second Churban. So the second Beit HaMikdash was doomed on day one. On day one, it was doomed. So how did it start? It started by building Yerushalayim and the walls of Yerushalayim. And only afterwards did they expand outward. Do you remember studying physics, nuclear physics in 6th grade? I'm telling you, I studied nuclear physics in 6th grade. I actually made a cloud chamber, a Wilson's cloud chamber, as a class project. So you learn about radiation and so on. What's the difference between fission and fusion? It's the difference between the atom bomb that was exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki and a hydrogen bomb. A atom bomb is fission. Fission means the splitting of the atom, and if it's done in a proper way, it releases enormous amount of energy. So you take an atom. Fusion is the exact opposite process. It's by taking atoms and forging it together in a certain manner that causes a release of even more energy than the process of fusion. But you know that to drop a hydrogen bomb, you have to first drop an atom bomb to trigger it, because you need that heat. But then afterwards, boom, you don't want to be near it when it goes off, right? The difference between Yerushalayim first time around and second time around was the difference between fusion and fission. The first time around, Yerushalayim was fusion. It fused together, it grouped together, it bound together all of the Shvatim into one cohesive whole. That's what Yerushalayim was. It was an act of fusion. In Beit Sheni, it was an act of fission. It started with Yerushalayim, and the Kedusha exploded outward. And the Rav said a big chidush, because the Rambam tells us that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, was abolished. Because we conquered, and that was the act of sanctification. The Babylonians conquered, they nullified and erased our conquering, and therefore there's no Kedusha. But after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, the Kedusha, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael, remained until this very day. Kitsha l'sha'ata v'kitsha le'atid lavo. Why? What's the difference? So Rambam tells us that the act of sanctification second time around was chazaka. Chazaka means settlement, hitnachalut, hityashvut. And we never, ever relinquished that title. There was always people here. The last 2,000 years, there were always at least 1 million of people somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. We never relinquished it. But the Rav went further. The sanctity of Yerushalayim never was abandoned, never. And because why? Because the sanctity of Yerushalayim has to do with the fact that a Kadosh Baruch Hu chose to be there. So you can have all the armies in the world, but they can't negate the presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. As the Rambam says, Shechina eina b'teila. You can't erase the Shechina, the presence of God. And therefore, if Yerushalayim and Bayit Sheni jettisoned sparks of Kedushat Yerushalayim upon every new settlement in Eretz Yisrael, every new settlement of Eretz Yisrael assumes the character of Kedushat Yerushalayim, and that sanctity cannot be abandoned. And therefore, Kitcha Shniya, Kitcha B'Shata, V'Kitcha L'Tilavo. Yeah. Because what sanctified Eretz Yisrael the first time around was not the settlement, it was the conquering, it was kibush. And that was undone. In spite of what? In spite of all that. The Rambam believes that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim remained, but the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was abandoned after Churban Bayit Rishon, and therefore if you happen to have been there in the 70 years of Galut Bavel, you were exempt from Truma and Maaser and Shemitah, because without the necessary prerequisite of Kedushat Haaretz, you don't have to fulfill any of those mitzvot. Yeah. Me. In Eretz Yisrael, that's a share in itself to define the difference between the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael and the sanctity of Yerushalayim. So the sanctity of Yerushalayim has to do with Beit HaMikdash, and its source is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. The sanctity of Eretz Yisrael has to do with the making us obligated in the various mitzvot that are Eretz Yisrael bound. So it's a different level of Kedusha, which, by the way, it's a lower level of Kedusha. However, what the Rav suggested was that because the Yerushalayim begins the process of Tkufat Bayit Sheni, Second Temple era, and expands outwardly to other new developing communities, they all have a touch. I call it a jettison spark of Yerushalayim, and hence there's something about the Kedusha that remained, which will then somehow activate the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael as well. This is a very interesting, novel idea of the Rav. You can take it or leave it, but he did say it. But having said that, this whole discussion of the two different purposes of Yerushalayim, let's go back to the poem. Let's go back to the poem and look at the last stanzas. The last, I'll tell you exactly where I'm going to start from. 3 lines from the end. 3 lines from the end is a petition, it's the last stanza. It's a petition from Ibn Gabri Rol to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a tefillah that he should restore Eretz Yisrael. But look how he says it. He started by saying Bavel and Seir, Bavel and Rome. So he's going to ask for the restoration of Yerushalayim on 2 frequencies, Bavel and Rome. And look how he does it. See, he was a genius. You have it, the 3rd line from the end. B'nei Beit Zvul. Beit Zvul is a nickname of Beit HaMikdash. It's one of the nicknames of Beit HaMikdash, Beit Zvul. V'hashev Gvul, and restore the borders. He knows that there's no Beit HaMikdash without the borders of Eretz Yisrael. Yerushalayim doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's got to be an Eretz Yisrael there. So we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to rebuild Beit HaMikdash, B'nei Beit Zvul, build the Beit HaMikdash, V'hashev Gvul, and restore our borders. And not just restore the borders geographically, politically, but there should be people there. Bring us back. Which borders? HaKarmel v'HaBashan. Which are those 2 borders? Where's the Carmel? Carmel's near Haifa. Carmel's near Haifa, right? Eliyahu Navi b'Carmel. And where's the Bashan? Where's Eretz HaBashan? It's Chumash now, since the end of Bamidbar. Eretz HaBashan, Chatzi Shevet Menashe, is the Golan Heights. Is the Golan. Now, do you know that when people traveled from Iraq, old Iraq, Bavel, modern day Iraq, so if you take an airplane from Baghdad to Tel Aviv, it's shorter, as they say, as the crow flies, as the Dreamliner 787 flies from Baghdad to Tel Aviv, much shorter, than the route that the travelers took. The business people, how did they go? They didn't go straight because it was desert. Most of the country of Jordan is desert. You don't want to travel there. You travel where there's an oasis with some water. So there's a traveler's route. And there's a little bit of a zigzag in Syria. And that's why, where did the Babylonian army come in from? Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. The Haftarah of Parshat Pinchas, the first Haftarah of the 3 weeks. From the north. One second, Babylonia is the east. Why did they come from the north? Because that's where they came from. They came this way, from the north. And that path is known as the Python path. Python is a snake. Now you know that in Hebrew and in Aramaic, the pei and the bet interchange in Arabic as well. The b and p interchange in Arabic, modern Arabic. And a taf and a shin interchange between Hebrew and Aramaic. How do you say 3 in Aramaic? Tlat, which is in Hebrew, shin lamet shin, shalosh. How do you say 8 in Aramaic? Tamnaya, which is shmona. Shmona. A tamnun is an octopus. A mituman is an octagon. So we've used the Aramaic equivalent of 8 for these modern day Hebrew words. So Bashan was actually Peten. And what is Peten? A snake. So why is it called Eretz HaBashan? Because it was the snake path area. That's where the travelers went. And Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah. And what Ibn Gabriel is saying here, restore our borders from the place that the Babylonians crashed through on the Bashan. And from the Carmel, where did the Romans come from? The Mediterranean. Opposite the Carmel Mountains, near Akko, which is the ancient port city. So you see the Carmel Mountains as you're coming to the borders of Eretz Israel. So he's saying, V'hashev gvul mi Carmel, ha-Carmel v'Bashan. V'ayin pekach v'nakom kach. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, take a look of what happened and take revenge. From whom? Me Eitzer umi Dishan. Who's Eitzer and who is Dishan? So you probably figured it out. One's Esav, one's Rome, and one's Bavel. But who is it? Do you remember Pashat Vayishlach? The end, where the Torah talks about the Alufei Esav. And this is why generals in the Israeli army are called Alufim, because the Gemara says on the Pasuk of Yadayim, Kol Yaakov, that's Tfilah. Hayadayim Yedei Esav, that's war. So when Yaakov Avinu goes with his arm of war, he's an Esav. And the top ones are the Alufei Esav. That's why the generals are called Alufim, the top officers. And 2 of the many Alufim was Aluf Eitzer and Aluf Dishan. Why? Because the Babylonians' policy was somewhat benign. They took over a country, and what they did was they actually allowed for the local leadership to continue. Babylonians were here in Eretz Yisrael 18 years before the destruction, and they let the king Yoyakim continue to reign, and then there was Yoyachin, and then there was Tzidkiyahu. They let them reign, and then they tried with Gedaliah. It didn't work. But they wanted only 2 things. They had a problem of logistics. How do you feed our soldiers, Babylonian soldiers, and where are they going to stay? We can't bring tents and so on. So the answer is they forced us to house the soldiers and feed the soldiers. They forced us to house them. That's Eitzer. Eitzer means treasure, means bounty. So we were forced to give of our homes and food to the Babylonians. What did the Romans do when they came here? They burnt everything down. You go to the old city, you go to the burnt house. And anytime the archaeologists find Rome, this charred material. They were the big burners. That's what they did. What is Deshen, Trumat HaDeshen? The ashes on the Mizbeach. And therefore, the Aluf Eitzer was the Bavel, the Aluf Dishan were the Romans, the big burners. And we say, Kach Nakam, we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, take revenge from these 2. Why? Shvot Ilaim, ve'az Yeshalem. Ilaim is the mute. We are mute. We know we deserved it. But do it anyway. Take revenge. Az Yishalem is lifted right out of Pashat Mishpatim in Dinei Mamonot, in monetary litigations. They owe it to us. Why? Hamav'eh v'hamav'ir. Anybody learning Baba Kama knows these are the last two of the four principal damages. So the last one is fire. Ki tetzei eish umatzah kotzim. It's the damage. That's Rome. Who is the mav'eh? So the Gemara himself doesn't know what mav'eh is. It has different things. But in the Yerushalmi, it says those who have an ox who tramples and eats from the neighbor. Shein v'regel. That's how the Yerushalmi understands maveh. Shein v'regel. That is the indictment against Bavel, who were drisat regel. They went into our homes and they took our food. They trespassed and they took our food. We're now going to send them a bill for hotel accommodations and full board and so on. That's the mav'eh. The Az Yishalem. And the Romans, they burnt everything. They're going to get a bill for our homes for that too. The mav'er. Yom Gavar Ha'oyev. On the same day, Shivasar Tammuz, Ibn Gabirol, working consistently with the Yerushalmi at the beginning of the poem, identifying Rome and Bavel as both having crashed through on the 17th, and using the Yerushalmi in Baba Kama to explain the Maveh and Hever association of Bavel and Rome. This is an absolutely brilliant piece of poetic literature. And we'll just end with that pasuk that I began. The Kadosh Baruch Hu should give us the great zchut of seeing the Tzom HaRavi'i and Tzom HaChamishi and Tzom HaShvi'i v'Tzom HaAsiri yeh lebeit Yehuda l'sosonu simcha u'lemoadim tovim, but that has an end. It says ha'emet v'shalom ehavu, when emet and shalom get their act together. And sometimes we know that they are in conflict with each other. But when emet and shalom are together, we'll have it together. All right, so I'll be here, Mitzvah Shem, in 2 weeks' time, and everybody should be well.